there's still the wishes involved. I wish I didn't have to do this. I wish my life didn't look like this. I wish my friends understood. I wish my family didn't have opinions. I wish the government would understand how hard we are trying to make our family work the way we planned, the way the big side was supposed to be. So Peter is a genetic disability, and when he was born, they told us he was fine. And in my mama's heart, I wanted to believe that. So I took him home with his funny looking face and his curled up foot and said, he's fine. We went to church. We praised the Lord. He's fine. But in my heart of hearts, I knew he wasn't. And it took 4 months before we went to a doctor, and they said to us, oh, this kid's got a lot of problems. First of all, there's a reflex that babies do when they nurse, suck, swallow, breathe. Peter never could do that. So feeding him took 45 minutes every single time. So there's a lot of issues in that. Your milk supply doesn't come in. He's not getting his nutrition. He's exhausted. I'm exhausted. Nobody's getting any sleep. He was failure to thrive. So we were, at 6 months, we were less than 12 pounds. And he still wasn't holding his head up. And he had a huge startle reflex, so that when the lights changed or a sound or something he didn't like, his arms would go straight out and he'd scream. Taking him to the grocery store, he's in the shopping cart. I mean, John's working a full-time job. I have a 2-year-old toddler and I have an infant. And nobody's going to do the grocery shopping for me. So I'm taking him to the grocery store, and over those bumps in the parking lot, he goes to screaming. And we get into the supermarket, and the doors open, and his arms go out, and he starts screaming. That's when I started noticing the glares and the stares. Why do you have that child out? Well, we were in Colorado with no family around, and I wanted to believe in my heart of hearts that this child was normal. So again, I had to do the grocery shopping and start to build some resentment. Start to look at those people and go, you don't even have a clue. I remember one lady, Peter couldn't do anything. He couldn't hold his head up. He couldn't eat. He couldn't do anything, but he could suck his thumb. He was a thumb sucker from early. He found that thumb early. And that was also at a time where first-time moms, and you're going to get this right, and you've seen everybody make all their mistakes, and people tell you, don't let them suck your thumb, you'll never get them off of it. But I was glad he did anything. And I remember once, she was a sweet old lady. I had a snarl, but she came up to me in the grocery store, and she said, oh, darling, you got to get that thumb out of that baby's mouth. I put my hand on my hip, and I looked at her, and I said, I don't care if he sucks his toe. I mean, there's moments where that grit comes out of you, but there's in your heart, you're still wishing that that little piece wasn't in your hand. And you're looking at your friends. There was when I was pregnant with Peter, we were at a big church, and all of us were pregnant together. There was like 6 of us, all expecting babies. And when Peter's born and he starts to have trouble, then I get the pity and I get the sad. And the friends that I thought were close to me, and I get it now, but at the time it hurt so badly because I couldn't make this be good or bad. I just had to deal with it. It was getting through each day at a time. It wasn't planning preschool. It wasn't talking play dates. It wasn't, oh, what's your child, what marker have you passed and all this other stuff. And they started to feel sorry for me, so they started to keep their mouths shut. You know, I'm not a part of the conversations. He's sitting up. He's rolling over. We had hot, solid food. I'm not a part of those discussions anymore. And you kind of start to feel invisible. And then when the crisis starts, when you go to the hospital, and they tell you baby's not going to live, and all you want is your friends to come around and hug you. Yeah, Peter. I had friends that told me, Carla, I'm sorry. I can't go there with you. And at the time that hurt. It hurt bad. But I get it, because you're loving on your baby at home, and you can't imagine what it would be like to take your baby to the hospital and the doctor tell you, there's nothing else we can do. So you get strong with your little piece of wishbone in your hand. And you start to say, God, I don't know why, but we're going to just keep going. We're going to keep going, and we're going to live in front of people. And some days it's going to suck. I remember when Peter was little, I found an article in the magazine, and I grew up in a Christian home. We couldn't even say "but" in my house. But it was actually an ad in a magazine, and it was, I don't even remember what the ad was for, but it was a big picture of a yellow rubber ducky. And it said at the top, today might be sucky, but tomorrow will be ducky. I almost said it wrong. And I tore that thing out, and that went on the refrigerator, because that was kind of the way it came. Today didn't work out. Tomorrow will be better. You rejoice in the little things. You rejoice in him sucking his thumb. You rejoice in him coming home. But another aspect to our life with Peter is I have an autoimmune disease called Crohn's disease. And as Peter hit crisis, then my body said, oh no, we're not going to deal with this. And I began having bowel obstructions almost every 4 to 6 weeks. I'd be in the hospital. So here I have this baby who can't do anything. My husband's in a full-time ministry position. We're in Colorado with no family around. And I'm in the hospital regularly with obstructive issues where I'm on major medications. Peter was 6 months old when I was in the room. One of my first major obstructions. There was the lactation specialist from the hospital. There was my doctor. The pediatrician was on the phone, and there was another doctor in the room. And they're all looking at me going, Carla, you got to stop. I was bound and determined to nurse this child. But I was on so many drugs, and I was so out of it, and they couldn't promise that this was going to resolve. You got to stop. You just can't feed him. You got to stop. This child could not handle anything but his thumb. He couldn't do pacifiers. He couldn't do nipples. He couldn't do it. So I had to send him home. Well, actually, he wasn't even at the hospital because he was little, but he went home with a lady from our church and had to cold turkey wean to a bottle. I still don't know how long it took. I had a friend that said, do you want to know how long it took? I think she thought she was trying to be kind to me, but I didn't want to know. That child screamed, I know, for hours, and his mommy wasn't there. And then the guilt. So again, I had the little short stick, wishing that I pulled the big one. We kept passing the time when they told us he wouldn't be with us anymore. We got through the failure to thrive. We figured out the nipples he was eating. At 5, he stopped absorbing his food, and he was losing pounds per week. A little bitty kid, less than 20 pounds. You can't lose 3 pounds a week. You just can't. His eyes were sunken in. You could see his joints. You could see every rib. You could see, the horns on your hips back here. Everything. Bathing him was just almost tear-jerking. And his system started to shut down. His numbers were awful. His heart was bad. His lungs were bad. And the doctors kept saying to us, we want to do a care conference. And I'm kind of over doctors at that point. So at first I didn't even want to know what that was, but then his pediatrician sat me down and said a care conference is when we sit down and we talk with all the specialists and we look at the big picture and we determine what we want his end of life to look like. Everything inside of me screamed, no, he's not done. He's not done. And all I wanted to do was see a nutritionist because one of his major issues had always been food. And for some reason, one day he was absorbing food, and the next day, as soon as I would start feeding him, he'd have diarrhea. And I knew it had to be food. I had to fight to see a dietitian. And when we finally saw the dietitian, they said he needs, I'm laughing because it's funny to me, he needs pre-digested food. Yes, I made that face. Who pre-digested his food? Are we talking baby birds? No, it's enzymes. So it's broken down with enzymes. And he has had a G-tube since he was 2 years old because of his swallowing problems. So we started feeding him at a drip, like an IV drip, 24 hours, constant drip, 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 and watching numbers on tests, taking him to the doctor every day, checking, watching, waiting, and he started to gain weight. And his numbers started to get better. And I wanted to go. I told you he wasn't done. But it was always something. I mean, there were still issues. And to the point where I'm going to I could be here all night telling you stories, but when we came to Hawaii in 2012, he was 12 years old. When we came here, he was on 24-hour oxygen. At night, we hooked him up to a feeding pump. We couldn't feed him during the day because he would gag and retch, and that's dangerous for a kid that could aspirate. So, and then the other thing is he would never sleep, so we sedated him. We sedated him with some super heavy medication to go to sleep at night for two purposes: to make sure that he could get his food and to make sure that he would rest and that mom could rest. 24-hour oxygen, feeding pump. We were on a pulse ox machine. When we came here, we were on a BiPAP machine. So if you're familiar with the sleep apnea, the machines that people put on at night, and it keeps positive pressure, well, for him, because his body will forget to breathe, not only was it positive pressure, but if he went a certain time without taking a breath, it would give him a breath. It was our option between that and a ventilator. So that's what we came in 2012 to Hawaii with. And first of all, they wouldn't let us have the BiPAP machine after we got here, so I was a little panicked. But we didn't. Obviously, we didn't need it. And after we were here for a year, he didn't need the oxygen during the day. We were still feeding him at night. We were still sedating him. The sedation medication we'd used since he was 12 was narcotic. It was actually alcohol. I know. And I wrestled with that for years. I'm giving my baby a full shot of liquor. It's a Mickey Finn. It's something that old movies used to knock people out. You know, I'm going to drag you out of here, so I'm going to give you something in your drink. But that's what worked for him. We did a 3-pronged attack. We did sedative, like a Valium. We did the knock him out medication, and we did the I don't care about life medication. Kind of sort of like a Demerol sort of thing. He'd been on it since he was 6 months old, and he was 12. So you do the numbers, he was dependent, and I knew it, and struggled with the fact that we were doing this. But he was still with us. So a year into our life in Hawaii, Kaiser stopped making 2 of those medications available to patients in their homes. Anna Nicole Smith died taking it. So I think there had been some publicity. And one of those medications, there's usually a medication that will counteract if you do overdose or whatever. Well, the chloral hydrate, there's no. They call it a rogue drug. If he ended up with a reaction to it, there was nothing we could do to stop it. And all of the doctors hated that we were on that. But it was not mind-altering like some of the other medications that they give kids. And so it was a Friday night, and I had run out of the medication. And I'm looking at this child is now 13. He's never gone to sleep without it. And you won't refill it. I've got to get through this weekend. I was mad. Oh, I was mad. But the grace of God, I know he was dependent. You guys know he was dependent. We were on such a huge dose, it would have knocked any of us out for 3 days. The first night was kind of rough. I think we slept maybe 3 hours. So, but not screaming, not the things that you think of a withdrawal. None of that stuff, just fussy. And the next night, a little bit longer. And by the third night, he slept through the night. How does that happen? So, fast forward. We're no longer on the sedation medications. Now, we really can't feed him at night because we're not sedating him. So we start experimenting and trying to feed him during the day, which we eventually did. He's now off of oxygen completely. There's not even oxygen in our home anymore. We don't use the pulse ox machine, probably has dust on it. No sedation medications. And he's fed during the day by gravity. We're not having to slow it down. We're not having to monitor it. It's time to feed Peter. And we feed Peter. So the child that we brought to Hawaii in 2012 is not the same little boy that we have here. He was never supposed to walk. And I don't know if you guys have seen, I don't know, he's not feeling good tonight, but he walks. He's not a marathon runner or a super efficient walker, but he can go from point A to point B, and he was never supposed to do that. So, yes. Yeah. And for a little one that they told us couldn't live past 3, and he will be 19 next month. So, yeah, my story could go on and on and on. But what I wanted to talk to you about was pulling the short stick and making sure that God knows our wishes, no matter what, if it's the short one or the big one. And God's been singing. He wants to make those a reality. And even though you feel like you're holding the short stick, God could make it the big stick. It's a matter of our perspective, and it's a matter of us understanding that God has a purpose. God wants to change you. He wants to change people around you. And he has something wonderful for you and all of that. And I'm going to quit with that because otherwise I'll be here all night long.